Hey guys, I wanted to talk about our sponsor for today's episode, Dangerous Waters Comics and More. Dangerous Waters is a new online store where you can find new and back-issue comics, toys, games, D&D books, and other cool collectible items from pop culture. Because Dangerous Waters Comics is new, you have an opportunity right now to get books that are hot, like Gun Honey, Stray Dogs, and Venom, in stock right now and at great prices. This month, all orders over $40 receive free shipping. And if you use code TWISTED10 at any time, you're going to get 10% off your order total. There's no way you're going to get a better deal than that this month. Dangerous Waters is also celebrating Wonder Woman month, and all orders will come with a free Wonder Woman gift. I always prefer to give my business to the little guy, and Dangerous Waters Comics is definitely one that you should visit. Have a look around, you just might find something that you like. Dangerous Waters Comics and More, where you can live dangerously. Over the past few months, I've been breaking down the Sorcerer class. Today, I thought I'd do something a little bit different and just kind of give you my thoughts on where I think each Sorcerer subclass ranks in relation to each other. So let's go ahead and do that. Welcome to the Twisted Tentacle Inn. I am your innkeeper, and today we'll be ranking the Sorcerer subclasses. Before we continue, if you like this content, please click the like button and subscribe. I also have a Patreon, links below, and I have a Discord, links below. So starting at the top with my least favorite Sorcerer subclass is the Storm Sorcerer. The theme of this subclass is really cool. I love the idea of someone who's imbued with the power of nature and able to control weather and create storms and use the power of weather to their own needs and to their own will. But unfortunately, the implementation of this subclass didn't work out. It fell victim, honestly, to just 5th edition still being in its infancy when this subclass was conceived. This subclass was released in the Sword Coast Adventurer's Guide, which was the first expansion book for 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons, and I think the designers didn't quite know yet where they wanted to take the game, what was going to stick, what people were going to like, and which direction they wanted to go with subclasses for their new system. And so they commissioned another company to come up with the Sword Coast Adventurer's Guide, and unfortunately they went a little tame because they didn't want to break the game. And they came out with subclasses that were honestly underpowered compared to even the core subclasses in the player's handbook. A lot of the subclasses in the Sword Coast Adventurer's Guide have been shunned by the community as just too weak to actually function in the game. And most of the most unpopular subclasses in the game are in that book. And the Storm Sorcerer, unfortunately, is one of those subclasses. There are a few gems in that book, so it's not a total loss, but overall, I think most of the subclasses in that book are underwhelming. And the Storm Sorcerer, unfortunately, has abilities that don't quite synergize with the Sorcerer core class. A lot of the abilities require you to be up close to enemies, and the last thing you want to do as a sorcerer is that. Not to mention, a lot of the abilities synergize with the damage type of lightning or thunder, and even to this day, with 5 years into the game, there really aren't that many good spells that offer thunder and lightning damage. Now, there is the transmute spell meta magic that you can use, but why waste sorcery points for every spell you cast to convert it into lightning or thunder when you could just pick another subclass and save your sorcery points for something that's actually good? So unfortunately, the Storm Sorcerer tops our list as the worst sorcerer subclass in my opinion. Next up on the list is the Wild Magic Sorcerer. I do like the theme of this subclass as well. The problems I have with it are twofold. One is I hate random. I hate random when playing a character as far as mechanics are concerned. If you're doing random rolls for flavor purposes, I'm totally fine with that. But when it comes to game mechanics, random rolls and random results for things really don't make for good character classes. They may make for good enemies, bad guys, that kind of stuff, or even NPCs, but for player characters, you want a little bit more consistency. You want to have a little bit more agency with your character, and I feel like the Wild Magic Sorcerer takes that away a little bit with its randomness. Some people do enjoy that. Some people like the chaos of it, and that's totally fine if that's the type of subclass that you like. It's not for me. It's not my style of play. I like to be able to control the results of something that I'm doing so that I know that I had an impact on things based on a decision that I made, not on a lucky effect that just happened to come out because I rolled a die. And I'm not talking about the randomness of rolling an attack roll die and hitting or missing, because you can actually enhance your chances to hit or damage when it comes to that. But with the Wild Magic Sorcerer, there is no way to enhance the roll or manipulate it to a point that's going to be favorable for you. It's completely random, 100% random. So there's no strategy involved there. It's just luck or bad luck. So because of that, I dislike the subclass. Now, some of the other abilities are pretty decent, actually, and even with the, taking out the factor of the random rolls and the random effects of the Wild Surge tables, the subclass on its own does have some pretty good abilities. So I would consider playing a Wild Magic Sorcerer just for those abilities. There's definitely not going to be as strong as some of the better sorcerer classes or stronger sorcerer classes. Again, my opinion. But, it's playable. It's playable. Now, I said that my problems with the subclass were twofold. The second issue that I have with the subclass is the fact that it is very Dungeon Master dependent. Unfortunately, a subclass that depends on the Dungeon Master to have its effects go off and to ensure that certain things occur, such as the Wild Magic Surges, I think that's bad game design, because as a Dungeon Master, you already have a lot on your plate, and the last thing you're going to be thinking about is, oh, maybe I should make this Wild Magic Surge. So unless you planned for it before the session and you make a note for yourself as a Dungeon Master, like, at this point in the adventure, I'm going to have a Wild Magic Surge happen, then you're probably going to forget as a Dungeon Master. And as a player, constantly having to remind your Dungeon Master also feels like you're nagging them for it. And I just don't like that kind of interaction and that kind of relationship between the player and the Dungeon Master. So I really wish that this wasn't designed that way. Next up on my list is the Draconic Bloodline, and this one is decent. At this point, I think, is where the sorcerers start to get pretty good. The Draconic Bloodline gives you an AC bonus of 13, of basically a base AC of 13, unarmored, so you don't have to cast mage armor. You can boost your dexterity and make your AC fairly decent for a first level character. At the higher levels, it's probably not going to make a huge difference, but at least you have that to survive during the really frail levels. Not to mention, you get that hit point bonus. Every level you get an extra hit point after you reach, I believe, level 6. So that's also pretty nice. So the Draconic Bloodline has pretty decent survivability. And then there are a few bonuses for elemental damage and elemental resistances. Sure, you do have to expend sorcery points on some of these, and they're only temporary. So that's why this subclass is a little bit worse off on my list than some people might give it credit for. But I do think there are some design flaws. But again, I think it's because the subclass is also a victim of this subclass being designed in the infancy of 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. Should that subclass have been designed more recently, I think some changes would have been made to it. But as it stands, it is what it is. It's still a decent subclass, but it's definitely in the upper tier of worse subclasses for the sorcerer. Next up on my list is the Divine Soul, right smack in the middle between all the other sorcerer subclasses. The Divine Soul is a pretty interesting subclass. I find it a lot of fun. You can build it in so many different ways. What the Divine Soul has is options. Lots and lots of options, to the point where it can be overwhelming. Some people rate the Divine Soul pretty high up there on their list. I rate it in the middle, mostly because the choices, you have to be a certain type of player that knows kind of where they want to take their character. Otherwise, decision paralysis is definitely something that can occur when you're playing this subclass, because now you have access to 2 full spell lists of 2 full casting classes. So it is extremely overwhelming to have to choose between 20 something spells for just one spell level, and you only get to choose one or maybe two from that huge list of spells. That can be overwhelming, and sometimes there's so many good ones and you don't know what to choose. You almost feel cheated or left out if you're not able to choose all the options that you want. But that said, if you do know and plan ahead, this subclass can be quite powerful. There's some great abilities. There are a couple of stinker abilities that you probably won't use, but I think Favored by the Gods is a great ability. I think using meta magic with a lot of the cleric spells create some really interesting things and effects that you normally wouldn't have in the game of 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. So I think that the combination of meta magic and the cleric spell list really gives you some tremendous options to do some really cool things during an adventuring day. So that's why this subclass is right smack in the middle for me. Next up on my list is the Shadow Sorcerer. I think the Shadow Sorcerer is pretty awesome. It's came out in Xanathar's Guide to Everything, along with the Divine Soul Sorcerer, and I think that the Shadow Sorcerer does eke out the Divine Soul in being just slightly better mechanically, because a lot of its abilities are pretty synergistic within itself. There aren't very many abilities with the Shadow Sorcerer that are stinkers. Like the Divine Soul does have one or two. The Shadow Sorcerer, every ability is pretty good. The Hound of Ill Omen is fantastic, having pretty much a heightened spell. It costs you the same amount, 3 sorcery points, to bring out the Hound, but once it's out, it's something that's recurring every round, so you're getting a lot of value out of it. Instead of using heightened spell every round and spending 3 in 3 rounds, that would be 9 sorcery points. You only use 3 sorcery points one time, and that Hound lasts for the entire combat, giving disadvantage to saving throws to any enemy that it's nearby. And you can affect multiple enemies if there are multiple enemies near this Hound when you cast a spell. So you can actually make it even better than a heightened spell. So I think that this subclass is great. Not to mention you have that darkness ability where you can cast the second level spell Darkness at a cheaper cost using just 2 sorcery points. That is the first time that we saw the ability to use sorcery points to directly cast a spell, as opposed to using a bonus action to convert them into spell slots at a basically almost a rip-off, because 2 sorcery points normally wouldn't get you a second level spell slot. But with the Shadow Sorcerer, you can use 2 sorcery points to cast Darkness. And not just that, but the Darkness you cast, if you use it using sorcery points, it's a very special casting of Darkness that gives you some additional benefits. Like you could see through it with your dark vision, which is pretty awesome. And because of that, I think that the Shadow Sorcerer has some really interesting things to it. Flavor-wise, I think it's also pretty cool. Next up on my list is the Clockwork Soul Sorcerer. The Clockwork Soul came out in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, and it's no surprise that the top 2 subclasses for the Sorcerer for me are in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. As the game has progressed, I think the designers have gotten better at figuring out where the strengths of each class and subclass can be put. And in this case, the Clockwork Soul addresses a lot of the issues that the Sorcerer class had from the very beginning, and that is just a lack of spells known that they can use their spell slots on. So the Clockwork Soul gives the Sorcerer a tremendous amount of spells known that they can use their spell slots on and meta magic on, plus add on top of that some great abilities and spells from other spell lists that normally sorcerers wouldn't have access to, some of which are really, really cool and really powerful. So you're able to create a character that is actually pretty potent in both combat and outside of combat. So I think that the Clockwork Soul is a fantastic choice for a sorcerer, one of the strongest sorcerer subclasses in the game. And my top favorite sorcerer subclass is the Aberrant Mind Sorcerer. This should be no surprise to anyone. I think the Aberrant Mind is far and above the best sorcerer subclass in the game, both mechanically as well as flavor-wise. I mean, my channel is called the Twisted Tentacle Inn, so you guys know I have a soft spot for Lovecraftian done right, and the Aberrant Mind Sorcerer is Lovecraftian done right. So I think that this subclass knocked it out of the park. Not only do they have an amazing spell list that they can choose spells from, just like the Clockwork Soul, they have access to a lot more spells known than other sorcerer subclasses, but in addition to that, they have so much flexibility with their sorcery points because they can use a trade of an even number of sorcery points equal to a spell level and cast spells that way for their psionic spells, which is amazing because it gives them the ability to cast more, to convert lower level spell slots into sorcery points and then use those to cast mid-level spells up to 5th level. And I think and I think that because of that, the Aberrant Mind can cast more 4th or 5th level spells than any other class in the entire game of 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. And that's nothing to sneeze at. That's actually really, really potent when at the higher levels you're casting 10 5th level spell slots in one adventuring day before taking a long or short rest. That's pretty impactful. And the spells that you have access to are pretty good at that point. So the Aberrant Mind is versatile, it's great, and then the spell list that they have access to gives them a tremendous amount of utility, where the Clockwork Soul is more of a defensive spell list, a little bit of control, but mostly defensive. The Aberrant Mind has a lot more control and utility, which makes it far more versatile than any other sorcerer in the game, and even puts it neck and neck with some wizard subclasses. So overall, I think the Aberrant Mind Sorcerer is far and above the best sorcerer subclass in the game. So I'll put the question out to you. How does your list look? Does it differ than mine? Do you think I'm wrong in my assessment of which ones are better than others? Let me know. I'd love to see your list and your reasoning why you chose the subclasses that you did in their positions that you've chosen. So let me know in the comments. I'd be happy to respond and read through your comments. I read every comment on all of my videos and try to respond to every single one. So if you have any questions or if you disagree or agree, let me know. I'd be happy to hear from you. Thank you again. And as always, click like, subscribe, and check in anytime. I'll talk with you then.